Welcome to Progress Always, where we empower our leaders to create alignment between their habits and their goals by prioritizing their health and eliminating stress. And I have with me my homeboy, Matt Gottesman. He is my brother in healing, my brother in creativity, my brother in leadership, my brother in business. And he is quick, fast, and in a hurry rebuilding his second podcast. You're 400 episodes in?
Yep, I am.
And have you decided what the title of your book yet? I don't want to give too much away.
I'll put it this way. I have. I'm not gonna.
Okay.
I won't say it publicly just yet. But
Okay.
if they listen to the podcast and follow some of the other things I'm doing, they'll know
Yeah.
what it is. They'll know what it is. Yeah,
That's what's up. The book is coming. The book is coming.
The book is coming.
The podcast, the niche is you.
Yep.
And I guess the best place to start, man, because I met you as you were embarking on this healing journey, and to use your words, everything that you were doing for everybody else, you are now doing for you.
Yeah.
And I feel that to be so empowering because I've sat in rooms with executives, with leaders, and the big 30,000 foot question I'm asking that kickstarts the conversation around self-awareness is, as a leader, are you making yourself legitimately an asset, or are you slowly but surely working yourself into a liability?
Right.
Because you're doing for everyone else and not doing for yourself.
I have a great story that I was very fortunate to be a part of years ago when I was helping out with Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, on like all things digital. And there was a director with one of the brands there that I really admired, always had a really great way of looking at just a person's individual talent and what they're bringing to the whole of the picture versus, just being there and being, just a cog in the wheel, right? He was never that way. And I remember we were talking to a potential resource in like web design and digital, and this kid was so good. He was so good. And I'll never forget, this director turned to him and he said, curious, why don't I really see any of this on your website? Why don't you really have a website? And the kid's like, oh, I don't really have any time. And he goes, yeah, that's a problem for me. And I'm like, oh, this is going to get good. Because he was always very philosopher meets business, which I always love, the two, because personal development and faith and business, I think they're all very much intertwined. And so the kid goes, okay. And he goes, well, here's the thing. He's like, you're extremely talented, and I want to work with you under one condition, that you put you first, and you put your projects first, and you put your website first. Stunned, this kid was like, what? He goes, here's the deal. He's like, if you do for everybody else, there's a risk on my part that you'll reach capacity and you will not at some point be able to do for me what I have hired you to do. That's number one.
Yep.
Number two is, everything you do for yourself will be done in an unmanaged way, in a very organic way, in a way where you're experimenting on you to levels the general public never gets. And I want the benefit of what you learn for yourself to be done for me.
Yeah.
i.e., whatever beautiful results and details and new depths of your craft and everything you do for yourself, I want the benefit of that in the work you do for us. And I was like, whew, God. And it was brilliant. And it's very true, because we get this unfiltered version for ourselves with our work and our craftsmanship and our mastery in all areas of our life. And what we do for ourselves, we do get to pay forward. We are the mission. We are the work. Like, do the work for ourselves. Otherwise, if we're constantly in this state of doing it for everybody else only, we're always kind of catching up to do the things that we're supposed to do versus the things that maybe like we need to do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's very forward thinking from a leadership perspective.
Very.
And that is, I would say and feel very confident in saying it's extremely unusual.
Yep.
From a leadership perspective to express that kind of vulnerability, right? And some would say leave yourself at risk,
right,
to not getting the best out of that person because of their individual pursuits.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thinking is where it's at, you know, because now that person feels extremely taken care of. They feel seen.
Yeah.
Right. And it creates the message and the culture that they're being taken care of.
Right. I find the former, by saying, you know, by not taking care of the person or worrying about, you know, them having other endeavors and all that other stuff, I find that to be a very lack mentality.
Yes.
You know? And I get it. I preach about this a lot in a lot of my, like my newsletter, which I don't really call it a newsletter, but like, but all of the stuff I do online, I preach a lot about that old business paradigm. I'm not saying that it was everybody, but I think it was decades of doing business a certain way that had a lot of that. And I get it, because you had a lot of people, I think, in different positions, whether they deserve them or not, titles, metrics, you know, worrying about if they made a mistake, were they going to lose their job, you know, depending on the leadership that was there. You know, fortunately, some of the brands that I worked with were phenomenal. And then there were others that were interesting. You know, I saw a lot in the corporate world. And so I think you can't have that lack mentality. Like, take care of people who take care of you, and take care of people, and they will take care of you even more. In fact, like, that relationship is everything, because like they will take care of you in a multitude of ways that you hadn't even thought of, and the uncertainties, if you will. So
totally. You know, you got to have, that's how you create a proactive, positive shift in the culture.
Yeah.
Right. And you'll get way more out of people towards your mission and vision than you ever would otherwise. You know, otherwise they're just punching the clock, doing the bare minimum.
Right.
You know, what's the term they use now? Presenteeism. You know, just going through the motions, waiting for the next best thing. You know, their job is looked at like a dating app. Right. You know, as soon as the next hot thing shows up, I'm out and on to the next. So yeah, that's awesome, man. Now, in your journey to this point, especially from a health perspective, how has making that shift, doing all the testing, and getting to the root of your issues, how has that served you in your productivity and your ability to create and make and cross over into that realm?
I mean, it 10x'd it, probably 100x'd it. And you know, you've probably seen the photos circulating the internet with the like creatives are the new athletes, or like, you know, I like to also say like writers are the new athletes, or the you know, whatever, all these different, you know, artists are the new athletes. You get all these and not to take away from the athletes, but to say that the disciplines and the dedication and the commitment and the consistency, right, that comes into all this. It was interesting. Health is everything. Without it, you've got nothing. Literally, without it, you've got nothing. So, but for me, I first noticed, I believe, as a nervous system issue from when we were either out of alignment or in a wrong environment, or worrying about all these different things that maybe we shouldn't be. You know, the nervous system can wreak havoc on your body. So that's like one area. Then we can also, if we're not cognizant of what's going in our body. So there's the nervous system, we got the emotional side, we got the spiritual side, we got the physical side. You know, there's so much to the effects on the body. And the journey was always, there was always something close by that told me, like, you need to pay close attention to some of these things that you're not currently, right? Yeah. And when my father passed in 2019, that really, because I felt like he was still very young in his 70s, and I'm like, wow. And he wasn't sick his whole life. It was very quick. And I didn't like that clearly, but also like it shook me up, and I was like, how am I doing things? I want to, and once you start asking yourself really like, how are you really doing things? How are you approaching your work? How are you approaching your life, your
Yep.
relationships, your food, your just everything?
Mhm.
That question starts to open up like, well, how am I feeling?
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and
That rabbit hole's deep.
right. Oh yeah. Right. Because then once you start to like you want to figure it out. Once you get
Mhm.
curious, which is why I
Yep.
always promote like critical thinking and curiosity. Like I can't tell anybody what to do, but I can
Mhm.
get you to think a little bit deeper about what are you doing and why and how and where would you like to be or go, right?
Yeah.
And I think once you
Mhm.
start doing that, forget it, because that opens up the rabbit hole for everything. And I wanted to get to know my health better, and I wanted to get to know, I wanted more energy.
Mhm.
I wanted less brain fog. I wanted my skin to feel good because, like, I just, um, I felt like, at times you can feel the skin, you can feel the, just these different areas affected by your health, and I wanted to just have more vitality. I wanted to not feel like I was tired all the time. And I was redlining a lot in terms of, like race car drivers, like when they hit that max speed and they stay there and the engine starts to, go.
Mhm.
So I was genuinely curious, like, what am I putting in the tank and how is it affecting all the parts? I think a lot of people think that, you can go to a specialist and it's just one part of your body. No, your whole body is a system. It's
Yep.
one full system. Now it's not as a taboo of a conversation to say that,
Yeah.
at least, in our circles for sure. But like, but
Yeah.
there now, there's a lot more convos of that. And so I really I wanted to really figure it all out from the inside out. What's going on a nervous system, how, like, I
Mhm.
was calm, but like, is there anything that I'm not dealing with? Is there anything that I
Yeah.
need to do better? Is there how am I structuring my day?
Mhm.
What am I doing from the time I wake up? How am I, like, with my technical devices? How am I with my calendar? How am I
Yeah.
with when is my greatest productivity? When is
Mhm.
when should I apply creativity? What am I eating and when? All of these things, like,
Yeah.
we're a piece of art that we have to really tend to.
Mhm.
So it's a lot.
You know, you bring up a really good point because you have to customize your life,
Yes.
right? And the ingredients, the process is a lot the same for all of us, the
Yep.
great majority of us. However, how you put that recipe together must be customized to
Exactly.
the ebbs and flows of your life.
Yeah.
Right. And to your point, I'm from a neuro-linguistic programming perspective, like I believe in the four states of being, the
Hmm.
foundation being your physical,
Hmm.
which regulates your emotion, which
Yep.
clears the space for your mental, which allows for the expression of your spiritual.
Yep.
Right. And you have to figure out for yourself how to manage, which buttons to push and which levers to pull and when, so that you're able to, as best as possible, optimize those four states, your greatest expression being your spiritual self. And
Yeah.
that's not from a religious perspective. That's who is Matt, and can Matt be Matt
Yeah.
out here in the world without inhibition.
Right. And
Right.
my very highest self and contributor of, what I'm here to do.
Mhm.
And yeah, you need all of those other things, right?
Yeah.
And I love that you brought that up. And it's an interesting, like, even the studies on, like, the pineal gland, and like, and what does that do? That absolutely connects us to the divine. It connects us to God. And it's like, or someone would say, yeah, like, where the intuition and the the knowing come from. Like, yeah, so if you're blocking that,
Mhm.
and like, with paying attention to things that don't need your attention, to distractions and, bad, like, food that has chemicals in it that literally is blocking it,
Mhm.
so, and I'll say, like, a complete aside, it's very interesting because, um, as I started taking note too of every ingredient that went in my body, food has never tasted better than it has ever done
Oh, yeah.
before. Like, and it's an interesting thing because, like, when I've had people say, like, oh, like, it seems so disciplined, it seems so this, I'm like, you realize I'm eating the same foods as you, just it's the different ingredients. I'm like, you'll
Mhm.
eat, this kind of butter, but I'll eat, Kerrygold. Like,
Yeah.
you'll get this kind of meat. I get my meat from farms, that are, and the meat, like when and like I'm grilling all the time. So I think that there's sometimes a misconception of that a discipline is going to be a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. It
Oh,
really is freedom. You're like, no, like, what if I told you that what you eat, it would taste better? They're like, wait, tell me more. What if I told you that what you did for a living, you could make more money if it was differently aligned? Like, wait, tell me more. It's like, like, it's just, what's the environment? What's the inputs?
Yep.
And where are you maximizing your outputs? Right.
Yeah. Well, dude, it's so funny you say that, because I tell people all the time, you can eat whatever you want under the assumption that it's in alignment with where you want to go.
Right.
And that's where people mess it up. They're reluctant to confront the fact that what they're choosing to eat is out of alignment with what they actually want.
Right.
And where that's really important, once you start to right the ship with regards to nutrition, your palate changes.
Yes.
Your cravings shift. Fruit is sweeter than candy. Right. Meat is so much more delicious, savory. Yes, thank you. All of those things, they're subtle, and you don't notice them as you're making the shift.
Right.
However, when we regress or we choose to stray from the path, which I think, to a certain extent is also healthy.
Yeah.
Right. To a certain extent, you'll realize in the stray, like, ooh, that tastes different than I remember it.
Right. Oh, man. Oh, it's subtle until it's not. And then I remember waking up one day, I'm like, have I been poisoned? What I'm saying? Like, I was, which is now everybody's talking about this more openly, thank God, I guess depending on the circle you want to hear it in, but I thoroughly enjoy it because because I went through it. And it would be funny because you ever revisit old restaurants or old foods or old chips or snacks or certain things, and I eat them, like, this literally tastes like chemicals. And it's not like, oh, you're just saying that because it's in your head. Like, no, literally, I'm like, and that actually the ingredients are chemicals. And it's so funny because it goes to show you, like, have we been poisoning ourselves, like, for so long, and because of the appreciation for ingredients. And that's why I tell people, I'm like, oh, listen, oh, cool, I get it. You like to eat. I'm like, I do too. I love eating. I was like, what if I told you it could taste even better? So it's like you're almost appealing to the, once we wane off these things over here, and you can have a either better version of that or something different, you'll look at this and be like, I could never eat that. Like, again, I wouldn't, why would I even want to, So it's, I guess, appealing to the reward system as well, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, people only move in two directions: away from fear and pain, and towards love and pleasure.
Yeah.
There anything else, you're just stuck in the middle. So now, as I've come to know you and watch your message, and you are so in tune, and I'm just interested in your perspective because I feel like you're the one to break this open in an objective fashion. Trump just spent 3 hours with Joe Rogan.
Right.
And regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, and I don't know your political leanings, you don't know mine, because we never talk about that stuff. Right. But from a marketing perspective and conveying one's message to the masses, what I see is that podcasting is going to be the way to go for public figures, as opposed to conventional 90-second, 3-minute sound bites in a debate format moving forward. I feel like that can of worms that Pandora's box is now open, and you can't shut it.
Yeah, I think it's long been that way. Long form, preaching long form for years, before, long form now has really entered the conversation in the last like couple years. And with podcasts, you have the ability to have conversation. You can't escape conversations. I mean, you can kind of curate it and you can get fluffy and stuff like that with it. Like that, I think some may do, of course. But for the most part, the people who, as you and I were talking previously about like attention, people pay attention to conversations, real conversations that people are willing to have regardless of where they're at, and actually like be very open, and I think that, again, previous establishment, whether it was business, media, all that stuff, which I have not pretty much ever agreed with.
Sure.
When there's certain business principles that obviously I think were very, good, of course. I don't want to take away from the people who've come before us, but establishment in general, like, I think that they're, they were always so more concerned with, well, we can't make a mistake, we can't look bad, lie about it. Like they want it, the idea of just being open and having an honest conversation, I think, because I saw this in the business world too, I think scared the utter living, ish out of most people.
It's
and
too curated.
Right. And it was so curated all the time. And I'm like, you don't understand. I'm like, trust comes from the ability to have conversations that are open and communicative, and there's dialogue. And you can trust somebody more when there's that, openness, if you will, to have these types of conversations. And I remember even seeing in the business world, so many times people are like, oh, we made a mistake, we can't let anybody know that. I'm like, I guarantee you're going to sell more product from letting people know that. Like, oh, no, we can't. I'm like, things don't work like that anymore. I've been saying this for a long time. I mean, the internet's been my business since I first got into business for myself like 20 plus years ago. So I knew what was going to happen, because you've gotten rid of all the gatekeepers, and you said, hey, like, the internet allows you to find, to talk about the things you want to talk about and find the people from around the world and bring people together more. And it becomes very transparent. And I knew for a long time that transparency was going to hinder the business world, the medical world, the education world, the media world, the government, like all of these, like because the people move faster than establishments. They always have. And that's why you've seen a lot of resistance and a lot of kind of control and kind of all this stuff about like, we can't let that happen. We can't this. I'm like, listen, that's not, even in this day and age, you're actually making it even worse for yourself trying to fight that, doing something wrong, because you prove the point even more for why we're all leveraging our platforms and having the conversations and dialogues. And yes, of course, not everybody is going to agree. That was the point of, of being able to have open dialogue. Right. So I think it's an incredible time that's just showing even more so why legacy media just doesn't get it. And it's there. I think they want to, but I think it's hard because you're talking about decades of systemizing a certain behavior and approach. And then you got all the other stuff intermingled behind the scenes that most people don't realize, like the money, especially the money, or or better yet, who's providing that money. And I think that's where, and now what do you have? You have a rise of everybody being an independent. And Naval Ravikant, I love him. He said, he's like, the internet employed 8 billion monopolies. We are all now basically our own. Should we allow it? Should we give ourselves that ability to be our own voice?
Well, I see a lot of parallels in what you say about, marketing and legacy media that we've said and have unpacked and accepted in the fitness world for a long time, in that bro science is ahead of any double-blind study by, in a lot of cases, decades. And that's what we're experiencing in the here and now with regards to access to podcasting versus conventional media, and having these fully transparent conversations where we can openly discuss these things from a place of understanding, as opposed to this fight to be made right, or to agree, which is so much less the point, you know?
I mean, think about so many things converging at the same time. On one hand, you have people who are like, okay, cool, the system didn't let them into play, whether it was in health and wellness, for me, it was like a lot of like the stuff that I wanted to do in business and digital marketing and all this other stuff. I honestly dealt with so many gatekeepers all the time that like they just wouldn't let me in. So I'm like, okay, cool. I'm just going to go talk about these things over here from what I'm seeing based off of my actual own in real time experience.
Yes.
And talk about it. And so you have this world that's like, okay, they're not letting me in. Well, I want to go have these conversations over here. Number two, I want to be transparent because I also want to provide value because that's also how you attract other people. Number three, we have the mediums, online mediums, to actually deliver that value in scale, which, you know, if you look at a true free market system, which is like, oh, we have choice. And so other people are saying like, you know, these people over here are making a lot of sense. Like, how come you guys over here aren't talking about those things? Gatekeepers. and then so like, yeah, the last 4 years, what you're watching, I mean, a lot of people are like, can you believe all this stuff behind the scenes? I'm like, yeah, I've been saying it for over a decade. I was like, I just didn't say it to the point of like, let's point fingers, but I noticed what all these different establishments were doing behind the scenes. And I was like, and I don't believe in like, you know, an eye for an eye in that standpoint of like, let me like go. And it's like, but hey, I took to the internet to be like, well, can we have a different conversation on some of these things that may, you know, these are some other ways to maybe approach these things, given the beautiful thing, the beautiful ways that we have now to facilitate, right? So I think all these things converging at the same time have really allowed, you know, conversations around health and wellness that previously weren't allowed, right? And it's funny because it's disrupting an entire system. And, you know, and I saw that from, you know, loved ones going through the system to become doctors. So I was aware. So I actually saw up front, like what was happening with all the different, you know, players in that field. And that was, you know, so when people say, can you believe it's happening? I'm like, well, yeah. You know, and then you're like, oh, can you believe that these people got fired when they stood on integrity? I'm like, yeah. And can you believe, I was like, you don't understand. I was like, you've got so many different parts over here that we're playing together. And you know, it's like funded research. Well, who was funding it?
Right.
And then, you know, and then they go, well, this so-and-so magazine. You're like, yeah, who funds the magazine? And then they go to the next
climb
one,
the ladder,
like, you gotta follow the money. And like, and that was sort of like a hard thing for some people. Like, no, that's you're just being one of those people. Like, no, I'm not. Like, it's right there. Like, you're not gonna, somebody in one industry, like farmers, somebody's not gonna just fund something and then all of a sudden be like, hey, please go ahead and say something that's against us when we're your biggest donor. I'm like, that's not how the business world works at all. Like, you know,
that doesn't make, you know, objectively speaking, right or wrong aside, like that's not good business sense. You know?
Right. So even though we, you know, and wanting to play, of course, like from an integrity standpoint, that's where I think the internet opened it up, was how much integrity was not being involved in a lot of the decision making previously in the systems over so many decades versus the internet. And now I'm not saying that the internet can't be used for wrong. We see that all the time, of course. But I mean, like anything in life, you can use something for good, or you can use it for not so good, right? And so, but the internet opened up the avenue for here's what an alternative, integrity driven way without a gatekeeper can do. And so you saw the rise of like Rogan since doing this podcast since like what I think it was like since 2008, 9, you know, I mean, and so many other podcasters as well. So, you know,
you're taking me back to my first semester of grad school out of the Marine Corps. And I remember going to meet with the mentor I was assigned to, and, you know, that conversation was just to get to know you type. What do you want from this experience? What do you intend to do after, you know, you attain this degree? And at the time I had already started the process to build what is now Next Level HQ, formerly known as CrossFit PHX. And she was like, oh, CrossFit, that's a horrible idea. Don't do that. and I remember sitting there, you know, less offended because of, you know, the way I came into CrossFit from bodybuilding. So I had already thought all those thoughts, you know, and at the same time, going 30,000 feet above it and understanding the principle that it's the practitioner less the practice,
Mm-hmm.
the poisons in the dosage, so to speak. I just simply asked her, I was like, so, objectively speaking, regardless of how you feel about the expression, is it the practice or the practitioner that makes it, that swings the pendulum from positive to negative?
Right.
And she sat there. This is an intelligent woman, so less dumbfounded and more so unwilling to answer the question objectively. And we all know what the answer is to that. So I walk out of that meeting across the hall to my program director, and I tell her, like, look, I need a new mentor, because this is I'm not going to get the guidance I need to maximize this program if there's that dark cloud hanging over this relationship.
Right.
And
I think you bring up such a fundamental experience that started long before then too, for any of us. And it's why it comes in my conversation with a lot of the stuff I like to talk about online, which is so you cannot cookie cutter the human. You just can't. Every single person's path is very unique and individual. Now, you may be in the same discipline or industry as somebody and both be purposely there, on purpose and in purpose doing that, but you're still going to have a different path because of the uniqueness of who you are. But what happened is, when we came into this world, we are very tied to, in my opinion, of course, we're very tied to a life that is going to reveal itself, a life of purpose and what we're here to do. And along the way, you get a lot of people who say, here's what's acceptable for being a responsible so-and-so in society, and here's the right jobs, and here's the amount of money that it comes with it. Oh, well, I want to do this thing over here. Like, oh, no. See, that's cute and all, but this is where the money is made, or this is what, what makes you a good, husband or wife or father or mother or, person in society. All these labels, which are devoid of soul. And that's like the whole thing is like, no, you got to trust your soul. And have a relationship with your soul, have a relationship there with God, and like just tap in, right? And so what happened is you had a lot of people say like, no, this is the path that's acceptable. And it's like, who are you? You don't you don't even know the context of my talents. And like, and then of course it depends on the environment that the kids are in. Were their talents nurtured enough to see how far they can take it versus simply being like, hey, ignore everything and over here, this is where you need to go, and you're completely disconnected from why you should even be doing that in the first place. So there's always kind of something quote unquote missing, which is why you have all these, for so many decades, midlife crises. I like how somebody said it to me the other day. They're like, what if it's a midlife knowing? I was like, oh, go on. And they were like, all of a sudden they're like, you just wake up one day and you're like, wait a minute, like, I don't think I should have been doing this. And I'm like,
when people drop those questions in your universe, you're like, well, I got to be somewhere, but I got time. Let's talk about
it. And so, and you're right. Like, I think it's like, here you had, a position to, with this potential mentor. And I don't think people have done it always maliciously or anything like that.
No, absolutely not.
It's a product of how things, that's how things were always done. And I was not raised that way. I was raised to be like, listen, question everything healthfully, out of curiosity and respect. And you just like look into the details of things. Don't just immediately buy everything that somebody says to you just simply because they say it to you, because then there's no autonomy and agency in the process. And so I love that you had the ability to recognize that and say, you know what, like, I need a different mentor. And I remember real quick, I remember being in when I was in MBA school, and I'm in these business and marketing classes, and I was always an entrepreneur, but there's some entrepreneurial stuff there too. And and I went for the sake of at the time it made sense. And but it was interesting. I knew I was in trouble when, like, in some of the classes I was bringing up digital, and this is back in like 2011, 2012.
Oh yeah.
And and they were saying, oh well, it's part of it, but it's not like the biggest part of like the future. And I'm like, I'm in trouble. And like, and it's funny, and all my classmates knew I was the only digital guy there, and now they
Yeah.
all call like it's been a little while, but they all, at the time they're like there's no focus for any of them until like a
Yeah.
few years later they would start calling like, hey, what
Mhm.
about digital this and digital that? I'm like, your company's paying $100 million to an agency. You want me to give you all the advice over 2 hours on how to like do your job? I was like, you could just hire me as a consultant. Like, ooh, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get the funds for that. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, like, hey, no problem. Like, call when you guys are, ready.
Mhm.
But what happened was there was the shift.
Yep.
Digital did become this big thing.
Mhm.
And the reason I bring that up is because it's so easy for people to just dismiss something you might just know intuitively.
Mhm.
And you've got to be very, very,
You gotta be
diplomatic.
steadfast.
And what's
Yeah.
that?
You gotta be steadfast.
And steadfast. You have to be very steadfast
Mhm.
about that. And when I say diplomatic, also like learning to not take it personally or
Personally.
offense,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
at the same time move diligently and steadfast, as you're saying,
Yeah.
to like, keep going off the
Yeah.
hunt. So
Well,
learning to trust your intuition and gut.
dude, that's oh man, you're speaking to my soul right now. That was so much of my early struggles in business because I had always seen and more so felt, the knowing from here and not from here intuitively. There was this bridge between fitness and leadership. At next level we build the fittest leaders, right? And trying to articulate the bridge of that gap was extremely challenging for me for a long time. And I used to, when people would poo poo on the concept or the idea, or hey, just stick to the gym, kid, that's what you're good at,
Right.
I was like, no, there's more to it.
Right. And there's
And to your point about not taking it personally, where the shift really came for me was, instead of trying to justify it and rattle the cage, right? I went this way
right.
and started to ask myself, how can I, either through storytelling, or uh, uh, what's the word? Making it more concise, and
Hmm.
that, as opposed to, a 5-minute rant as to what we
Hmm.
do and how we do it and why it'll benefit you. How do I condense the message to the point where you get it immediately? And when I started doing that work, which was really, really challenging, I think it's Mark Twain who said, uh, I'm sorry this is so long. I didn't have time to write a shorter message or something to that effect. Uh, you know, that's when that stone really started to get polished and people were way more receptive to how we do things at next level from a performance consultation standpoint.
Well, I love that you led by example, and I think that's the mastery of ourself becomes the simplicity to communicate it to everybody else.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
from like we're our own, we're our own example,
Mhm.
and that's why I always. So when you said when you turned it in and inward, and it's like I tell people that all the time. I'm like, I don't want to convince anybody of anything. I want
Right.
to lead by example
Mhm.
and show what's possible, right? While getting you to think about what's possible for you that's similar or different.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's interesting, I recently had to give a talk at it was a State 48 Foundation,
Yeah.
and it was downtown. It was about 450 people there, and it was interesting. We were a panel, and talking about trusting your intuition. Like that was one of the things that came up, and I'm like, isn't it interesting that um, what happens a lot of times is we basically want to trust our gut, right? We say, "Oh, I'm going to do this," like, and then what does the world do? Can do? They say things like, "Well, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know it's going to turn out? How do you? Oh, well, you want to go become, a writer, an artist, or this? Like, ooh, that's a very saturated market. Not everybody makes it." I'm like, I believe doctors are a saturated market, and engineers and lawyers are a saturated market.
Yeah. No shortage of pipeline there.
No, in fact, one could argue there is more.
Mhm.
But that's an acceptable quote unquote answer, right?
Yep.
Versus like trusting your gut of doing a quote unquote unconventional path. I don't
Mhm.
think doing the right thing is an unconventional path. I think it's doing the right path for you.
Yep.
And we have this, and but I also have sympathy and I have empathy for like why people, what happens if this, what happens if that. I'm like, I get it. You don't have a relationship, or maybe aren't dealing with a relationship with quote unquote uncertainty, but you don't realize every day you wake up is uncertain. Uncertainty is a beautiful thing because you are allowing new information to come in and having the agency to like move through it and deal with it, and also like be guided by something greater than you within you that
Mhm.
knows a better path. In fact, I would argue that where you're trying to go would probably happen much faster should you listen to your gut more
Yeah.
than constantly fighting it with the human version of you that's always like, no, I'm just going to go do this thing instead.
Yep.
And so, the more we trust our gut, but it's hard because people say like, well, there's nothing tangible. I'm like, well, in order for me to make it tangible, I'm going to have to trust my gut, get the result, and then I'll show you. But anything
Mhm.
new that ever started, and I basically, and I always do this like at some of the talks. I'm like, everybody pull out your phone. And I'm
Yeah.
like, anybody in here will love their iPhone or love their Droid or Android or love their, and like everyone's like, yeah. And I'm like, amazing. Let's just deal with the iPhone for a minute. I was like, you realize that everything you consume,
Mm.
all of us, everything you consume, come from the people who every one of you said were crazy for going out on their own and making the very thing that you ended up consuming. I was like,
Mhm.
so who's crazy?
Right.
Like the person who
Mhm.
listens to their intuition, or the one who never tries, never, takes the risk, right?
Yeah.
So
And if I'm picking up what you're laying down, this is where the niche is you comes from.
yeah, oh yeah,
Is
a
the
big
is the trusting of that intuition,
Yeah, well,
right?
it was interesting. I was writing a bit on what it's called my newsletter, right? I know I was telling you I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
call it a newsletter. That's also called the Niche is You. And I was writing in an article. I'd seen an article talking about this concept of like everybody struggles with what to niche in.
yeah.
And this
Mhm.
gentleman was talking about like, really it comes down to, all of you, and that, you are the niche, right? And this is years ago, before some of the other people who were trying to coin the term, that
Mhm.
I saw something else, and I was like, I'm going to write an article about the niche is you,
Mhm.
and it did really well. It did well, not an article, but an essay on like this concept of it, because everybody always goes like, well, what's my niche? What's my niche? And I'm like, well, it's you. And don't get me wrong, I get that we need to go deep on specialties, things
Yep.
that really we want to spend our time on. Of course, like I want the mastery in the areas of like, hey, these are the things that I want to specialize in and do.
Yep.
But in the world of me and why I am who I am, the niches like each of ourselves, right? And a better way of explaining it is, I was giving this talk to 50 entrepreneurs, and the very first thing I said is, I was like, oh, I have a very simple question. I'm like, how
Mhm.
many of you in here have ever sold a product or service or offering talking about anything other than the product, the service, or the offering? And everybody raised their hand. I'm like, you know why? Is because somebody was relating to the human in you. Like they're putting like, because otherwise, if you're a realtor and you're a realtor and you're a realtor and you're a realtor, I'm like, all I see are realtors. But
Mhm.
if you tell me a little bit more about your world and all of who you are, this goes
Yep.
back to the whole what's going on with the internet. It's like, oh, we have a relationship now. Like, I feel like I understand you. I feel like I can trust you. I feel like I get more about like what you spend your time on and what your values are and what your principles are and like
Mhm.
all these other things. And so we don't have to box ourselves into, be understood in only one thing, or
Right.
only one role, or only one title. No,
Mhm.
like address me by the totality of me. But yes,
Yes.
here are the things that I like to, either do in business, or passions and interests and other things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit.
Yeah.
Where did where was the disconnect between the old way of Matt doing things, and then you have this awakening that becomes the niche is you? What did that shift look like for you?
Well, I think it was ongoing. I mean, it was a good, I think throughout life, there's always little, pieces being revealed to us along the way.
Mhm.
What I think was happening more for me, well, there was a few different, there's a few different things. One, again, with my father passing in 2019, I really started asking myself, I'm like, what am I really spending time on? And, you know, the shift started there, where I started thinking about like, well, how am I doing the work? So first, I had no problem still, um, not necessarily doing the things that are for, my writing and for the niches, you and the speaking and the podcasting
Mhm.
and all the products and stuff that I make now.
Yep.
But it did help me get more organized from a discipline of approaching with systems and whatnot. But it was interesting because I was having a conversation, and this has happened with a couple people, where I was coaching a few folks, and there was an individual who, she had like an agency as well, boutique digital agency, did all this great marketing for people, all this stuff. And I was like, what are the things that you built for you? And she had all these with a completely other topics, all in health and wellness and all this stuff. Like, there was just actually was phenomenal stuff, including a book that was launching, like just
Mhm.
all of this, all this stuff. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And she goes, what? And I was like, why isn't that being like marketed? Why isn't that like the stuff that you're, and she goes, oh, well, like, I feel like I went too broad on all of that stuff. And that's just like all the stuff that I love. And I was like, no, I was like, you haven't made yourself the client yet. And she was like, huh. And I'm like, believe me, I'm just starting to do that myself now. I'm like, because I was like, what's happening is you're taking your skill set
Mhm.
and you're helping others using the skill set to expand maybe their purpose. The hope is that it's their purpose. She goes, yeah. I'm like, what happens if you use the skill set for your purpose?
Yep.
And that was like where there was a lot more shift of like, yeah, I mean, I had a digital agency and I had like a lot of things that I had done in consultancies and like were real execution though, because I think
Yep.
consultants get a little, bad rap, but like, no, ours was always like, you execute and stuff, but then the digital agency and these things. And it was like, it was great to have these skill sets and I'm glad I learned them all.
Yeah.
But, one of the pieces of apparel that I made, it said, nah, bigger God. Cause it's bigger. Like we're much more than just that thing. And I was like, until I realized, well, what happens if I apply the skill set to the gifts that God, bestowed upon me, and it was like here to
Mhm.
expand on. It's like, why don't I use the skill sets to do that? And so that was a real big shift for me. And I was thinking so much about this idea of the niche is you or the niche, because I know everybody likes to say it two different ways. We go back and forth all the time. And
Yep.
I was really so I started over the last 2.5, 3 years where I was really just looking deeper into this, this intersection between creativity, spirituality, and entrepreneurship. And I say entrepreneurship because, that's the world I come from, even
Yeah.
though I know that we're not all meant to work for ourselves, but we
Mhm.
are all meant to have our own agency, like in our
Yes.
own, autonomy and agency. And so I
Mhm.
do think in some ways, like you may not be an entrepreneur, but you are the CEO of your life. And
Yes.
so if that is the case, then you do have to think about the niche of you in some capacity of like, what are all the things in which you are here to do, or are you aligning with who you believe you are to be in this world, and are you getting to know that person, are you getting to expand on that person and having a relationship with that person? And so the deeper I did it, the deeper that became the message for for what I put out there. And it's a very simple thing too, because what I'm hoping for is instead of the world all telling each other what they should do,
Yep.
I'd rather you get into a position of thinking for yourself, what should I be doing? Because if you are really
Mhm.
tapped in and aligned with who you are and your gifts, now you are definitely being more of a contributor to the
Yep.
world than a protester of it. I
Mhm.
would rather you be a contributor than a protester. And I get it, like protesting can help, maybe, depending on the whatever. But like, what if you were a contributor from your
Mhm.
gifts and you were leading by example and you were doing the things and showing what's possible and contributing that value and growing in any given area that
Yep.
helps assist others, but through you versus,
Yeah.
by giving you all away. Right.
Well, what you're saying is you're talking about reducing the friction in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, I stood in one of the executive management cohorts at Thunderbird not too long ago, and I gave this talk around making yourself a priority again.
Mhm.
Going back to this whole: are you, as a leader, are you an asset or are you a liability? Are you thriving or are you on the verge of burnout?
Right.
You know, and in that conversation, it becomes really uh, by the time it's over with, people stop are no longer looking at it from the standpoint of, because you know the entrepreneur conversation always sounds like you're shitting on W-2s, you
Right.
know, and that's not the case at
No.
all. But
Yeah.
to your point about being the CEO of your own life, having agency, what are the boundaries that need to be put in place? What tasks and initiatives need to be reprioritized so that I can be the fullest expression,
100%.
that my highest and best self, for not only my own salvation, but also for those that I love and serve. And that's a question that the majority of us never even think to explore.
And if we had more of those conversations with the W-2s in the corporations, in the companies, your
Mhm.
performance would be higher, your retention would be higher,
True.
your productivity, efficiency,
Mhm.
happiness, your, all of it would actually benefit. And
Mhm.
that's the funny thing is, like, I've actually long said that if you could go in and rewrite that programming within corporate structure,
Mhm.
you would actually have people who can, and this is a weird concept for them, but it's like work less hours,
Yeah.
maximize output, maximize productivity, efficiency, and return.
Mhm.
You actually like having people in the right roles, not do everything, but the right things.
Yeah.
Have people being able to say like, "Oh, hey, like this didn't work.
Mhm.
I want to correct this," because they're mastering their craft of the thing. Versus like,
Yep.
if I tell somebody that I didn't get this done, oh, we're gonna go find somebody else. We're gonna replace you. Like it's
Mhm.
just the nervous system alone of that
Yeah.
world is very fascinating. But and I'm glad that you went into that school because that's actually where I got my MBA from.
Hell yeah.
So and I think it's great. I think that those conversations need to be had. And it was a great
Mhm.
school, an absolutely great school,
Yeah.
because they were willing to have conversations that I noticed a lot of other schools weren't. And but
Mhm.
I love that you did that because yeah, like I want people to take care of themselves, putting themselves first,
Mhm.
so everybody benefits.
Totally.
Not at the cost of them, but at like the expansion of them.
Yes.
Everybody, your colleagues, your
Mhm.
bosses, your companies, your partners,
Yeah.
everybody benefits when you
Yeah.
take care of yourself. It's a byproduct.
100%. And we're moving into a space, and I've long believed this, that it's not so much the 40-hour work week that is of consequence, because you've already budgeted for the time and effort
Mhm.
required to fulfill a role and accomplish a specific task or initiative that exists in the corporate structure.
Right.
That time, that energy, that those statistics are proven and validated. However, a new way, a different way to think about that is, I'm hiring you for this outcome.
Thank you.
If it takes you 2 hours, well, now you're being rewarded for your efficiency,
Thank you. That
you know,
like
as
I'm sorry.
opposed to, and at the same time, if it takes you 60, so
That's on
be
you.
it,
Yeah.
you know.
I
Uh and that's agency.
and I you have no idea how I love hearing this because and I love this conversation because I so when I had my digital agency
Mhm.
and I had a nice small team about maybe about 6 7 folks
Yep.
and they were all independent contractors and I would
Mhm.
say listen and we had systems that kept us really tied together, digital
Mhm.
systems that were phenomenal. I'm like, what do you need to get this job done?
Mhm.
What are the times? Like, you tell me what you need. Gave them exactly what they wanted. It's
Yep.
like, great. If you get it done in less hours, that means you basically made more per hour from your efficiency, your turnaround time, your ability to do your job, all that stuff. Like, great.
Mhm.
That actually also helps establish even more value for your work,
Yep.
showing like as you get better and the amount of time it takes, you won't charge less. You'll be making more per hour because of
Mhm.
working less time from your own efficiency and
Right.
craftsmanship and building
Mhm.
on your systems and processes and disciplines. You should be
Right.
rewarded for that. And if
Mhm.
it takes a little bit longer, cool. Okay. Well, now you're looking at it as like, oh, well, by me taking longer, it's like it's being stretched out further. I should probably work on getting better and better and better at it so I
Yep.
can get that, amount of time to get something done down.
Mhm. Yep.
And what was is this was proven during 2020 when everybody went home to work.
Yes.
And what happened was a very interesting thing. I say whatever it takes you to get it done. If you get it done in 2 hours, but you're being paid on a 40-hour work week, I'm cool with that. You
Right.
produced a result and an outcome. Thank you. That's value. And if you treat people like valued individuals, they're going to keep doing it because they feel respected and loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting because what happened like during COVID is a lot of people came home. And I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you heard about this. I forgot where I saw these statistics. It was phenomenal. But what was happening is more people were getting more done in less time being at home, because
Mm-hmm.
what was happening was they had less distractions that they did, less meetings for the
Yep.
most part outside of Zoom, but less meetings. And then because they had time at home, they were going to do other things with the family.
Yep.
And they also had the sport, and the commuting was less. There were all these variables that came into place that
Mm-hmm.
was like, instead of them taking, 8 hours or 9 hours to get something done, they were getting
Mm-hmm.
it done in like 2 or 3 and then taking the rest
Right.
of the day off.
Which
Now they're
also,
thinking, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
well, that just validates the statistic that in an 8-hour workday, there's only 3 to 4 actual hours of work being done.
There's been tons of research on that for a long time. Even people like
Mhm.
Cal Newport, who wrote Deep Work, was like, at the most 3 sprints in a day, 6 hours total. And those are deep work sprints where you are doing uninterrupted,
Mhm.
intentional,
Yeah.
like focused, dialed in work. And
Mhm.
so what happened was there was a lot of companies who didn't necessarily like the fact that the
Mhm.
people were working quote unquote less hours, even though they were getting the results and the outcomes and the money and the profit that they wanted. And
Right.
so they're like, oh, we're going to call you all back in. We're going to call you all back
Mhm.
in. And now I'm not saying that I do actually think that there's legitimacy, of course, of being in a physical environment that
Yes.
make the physical environment better. Because
Mhm.
if people went home, they had a better life and a better return for you and a better outcome,
Yep.
and they had more hours, and then now you want to not reward them for that. You want to bring them back to the environment that was
Mhm.
actually working against them before. Like, what
Yeah.
kind of leadership is that? That even doesn't
Mhm.
even make any sense.
Right.
Unless you're like, no, I want them to come back because we do want people in person. But
Yeah.
we're going to try to make it even better than what we had before. That is in alignment with what they were doing here. But
Yeah.
I don't. That's tough to beat though. So
Yeah.
make
No,
people
it
question.
well, and there was also right there prior to COVID, the pandemic, where and everybody got sent home. There was this shift in corporate culture where they made very extreme attempts to make the office a place where people wanted to hang out and
Right.
be. And like, as noble as that initiative was, like, I come to work. I don't come to work to hang out. Right. So
Right.
it was very counterintuitive energetically. Are we here to fuck around, or are we here to work?
Right.
You
Right.
know? And so creating that hybrid environment, I feel like is the best practice. If you could get it done at home, cool. But we're also going to have a certain level of carte blanche on your calendar, so that if we need all hands on deck, we can also make that is also your inherent obligation for the freedoms and the fulfillment that this opportunity presents.
100 adaptation, iteration,
Mm-hmm.
right? Evolution, like the ability to constantly iterate how
Yeah.
things are done versus simply
Mm-hmm.
staying in a very stagnant place and saying, well, this is
Yeah.
the way it's always been done.
Right.
That will no longer work or fly when
Nail
we're
in the
going.
coffin.
It
Yep.
just won't, And
Mhm.
so yeah, and so what was interesting is when a lot of people were, because I even had a couple of former classmates call me up. They're like, it's interesting. They're like, I'm thinking I'm starting to get your world a little bit more. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, what do you mean? They're like, well, like I'm working less hours and I'm getting like the output and the return. I'm like, yeah. They're
Mhm.
like, but they're upset at what they're paying me. And I was like, because you were paid for hours, not value.
Yep.
And you should be respected for value. If
Mhm.
we pay you X salary, get us Y return.
Correct.
But unfortunately, if you were hired for hours, they're only
Mhm.
linearly thinking about the hours. And
Right.
that's where beautiful part about the openness of 2020 is that people
Mhm.
started questioning. They're like, I think I have more value than this. And you're like, go
Mhm.
on. Now hopefully you do, versus just the arrogance of thinking like, grass is greener. But
Right. Right.
but yeah, like, so I think that a lot of people started questioning like how they started doing things. And
Mhm.
to circle that all the way back to what you were saying earlier is like, not everybody's maybe in the entrepreneurial world, but I always certainly had friends that in the corporate world, and I heard this at Thunderbird, which was
Yeah.
they're intrapreneurs,
Mhm.
intrapreneurs, which, so again, the ability to creatively think,
Yep.
intuitively trust, and work in a manner that pushes, that expands the possibilities from where you previously were.
Yeah,
And that's
totally.
that's the beautiful part about business. And
Mhm.
that's why when businesses are first coming up, they're allowed to do all those things. And then when
Yeah.
the corporate overlords come in and like take over that, and it's like stifles creativity. And it's like, well, yeah, you haven't innovated in like decades. Of course you're
Right.
like, going through this,
Well, it's also interesting because I've been in a room full of gym owners for forever, and putting this spin on leadership and looking at things from different perspectives. A lot of folks come into the micro gym niche, regardless of what your flavor is, from a corporate environment, and they wonder why their turnover is so high, especially in a class driven model where the only person who's able to survive is the owner, not the coach, you know, because it becomes a fixed cost
right?
to the organization. And, to spin that, to open the conversation, it's like your job, your opportunity to take care of your people directly went bye-bye as soon as you sign that lease and put your name on that LLC.
Right.
Now your client is your team. Your job is to take care of the people taking care of your people,
100%.
right?
Both of our
And
world. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. And so, your job now becomes, how do I create a full-time opportunity for my people so that this is the only place that they really need to uh, move energy to create a sustainable living for themselves. And when I use the word full time in these rooms initially, they're like, I don't have enough revenue to pay for a 40-hour coach. I was like, no. You missed it. What is
Right.
the opportunity you need to create to facilitate that? And spinning that conversation, like, how do you get that coach? How do you get that employee? How do you get that team member to create enough value that they pay for themselves?
Right.
Right. And
100%.
there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. Uh, if you're willing to sit and figure out what that looks like for you.
I think it's such a great, there's so many great lessons for folks that come from corporate to entrepreneurship
Mhm.
in both manner. First of all, entrepreneurs and corporate need things that they can learn from each other.
Yes.
Entrepreneurs need infrastructure, they need discipline, and they need systems, something that corporations are phenomenal at having.
Yes.
So to all my fellow entrepreneurs out there, are like, well, we're this, or any of the corporate folks are listening, like, come on, man, like, give us some credit. Like, no, I think they have phenomenal. They know schedules, they know
Mhm.
structure, they know discipline, they know systems. They're great. Now, if you didn't like what you saw with how a company did it, the
Mhm.
good news is you can take that experience, bring it into an entrepreneurial world and say, here's how I would do the structures and disciplines and all these other things differently.
Yep.
And then to your point, but now it's learning, oh, but I have to, in doing so, to make it better than how I saw it done over here, I have to really take the number one person that I'm taking into consider, that I'm doing this for, the customer, the client. Who am I doing this
Mhm.
for? And I have to really be so about them in every
Yeah.
single way that I
Mhm.
think about all the other pieces that contribute to that, whether it's team
Yes.
members or hires or whatever it
Mhm.
might be. And then how do I do it in a manner that is sustainable? And
Mhm.
so, and then I was asked at that same State 48 thing. I wasn't asked. So the question of like hard work came up,
Yeah.
and and I agree. Like it was positioned a certain way, and one of the things
Mhm.
that I wanted to tell the audience is like, there's two types of hard work, and I think this is a very important thing. Is like, there's hard work for something that you feel connected to, and there's hard work for something you feel disconnected from. And they're two very different things, because what happens is if you're already working your tail off, entrepreneurial or corporate, in something
Mhm.
you are disconnected from, the sheer
Mhm.
thought of you going all in on something you're connected to, especially if the longer you've been in your thing, you're like, oh, hell no, I'm not like about to like, do you know how many years I've already put into this thing? I'm not abandoning this now for this thing over here. And I told the crowd, I said, listen, it's different. I was like, hard work for the thing you're connected to is different, because it's not like you're connected to it. Like it's it's work, but it's purpose, and it's life, and it's life giving, and
Flow.
it's yeah, and I was like, when you're disconnected from it, the work that is like very strenuous and very it's blocking the very thing
Yeah.
that you're here to do. And I was like, so don't let that distract you. But when you but if you're doing more, if you're really connected to what you're doing, I'm like, there will be moments where like it's hard, but it's not the same thing, because you're kind of like, something comes up and you're like, all right, we got to just figure this out. I'm like, there's things over here that you're just like, no way. Like, I don't want to figure this thing out, or you're forced to, and I was like, so keep that in mind. I'm like, the hard work for the things you're connected to are very different hard work. And I'm like, and you're going to be okay. Like, you are definitely going to be okay, because like, it's your soul. And so you're supposed to be in that, because how else do you do the thing so well for the people you were here to serve?
Yeah.
You know?
To put the amount of work, effort, attention into the thing that you're disconnected from takes energy from you.
Right.
Conversely, the thing that you're connected to
gives you more life.
Same attention, same effort, same amount of work. It actually feeds you energy.
Right.
And that's the difference. And, you and I, the whole reason we're having this conversation in the first place is because we operate on very similar frequencies, and we look at things from that energetic perspective.
Right.
Is this giving me energy, or is it taking energy from me?
Right.
And when you start looking at things that perspective, even in a hiring capacity, I'm that we have those conversations with our team all the time. Is this serving you or not? If the answer is no, how do we make it a yes? If it's going to forever and always be a no, you're not the person for that role. We need to find somebody else. And it makes it objective, removes the internalization of taking it personally, and we can move on in a positive and proactive direction.
Two things come to mind. I remember I was told by a spiritual mentor many years ago, does it move you closer to God? Does it move you closer to your purpose? Does it move you closer to where your soul is trying to take you? Or does it move you further away? And this goes for jobs, people, habits, all these different things. And when you think about it in that context, he's like, you'll understand you're playing two very different games. And what was interesting is I remember a time in my life where, the drive was always there. And, the wanting to build and create and do all these things were there. The clarity, I think, was missing. And what was interesting is when you're going through that, that's very depleting but I'll say this, just out of like being introspective, I guess, about the whole thing, is that once you do know what you want to do, like, so now being on purpose, that also requires, though, a level of let me back up to your point about it's very life-giving. But it's funny because now a new responsibility I hadn't anticipated was, and how do you make it sustainable? Because you can redline for something. Like, I love doing my work more than I've ever loved it my whole life. Like, I'm like, yes. And then there are days that I'm like, brother, I love you. I think you're redlining, man. Like, you might need to get up. And I was like, did you get your 10,000 steps in? Like, no, you did not. Like, did you do these other things? Because you're so like, you can see the vision. It's beautiful. It's a lot, like, you want it all, and burnout can happen for the things that you do want too. And I want to tell your audience that, because it's like, that can happen as well. You can definitely get burnt out for the things you do want to do. Very important to know that, because it doesn't mean that like, oh, this no longer works for you. It just means that you have to, like anything, like I always tell people, I'm like, oh, if it was a marriage, you would have to keep working at it and keep nurturing it and keep being a better individual and keep optimizing it and keep analyzing how you can make it better. It's like anything else, especially your purpose, because you don't want to burn out, And so that was actually an interesting, like, oh wait, I'm redlining now for the things I want to do. I'm like, this is an interesting, and then all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, the only way to sustain that is through health and faith.
Yeah.
So I'm like, here we go again, right back to the health.
There you go. It all comes back to the beginning, man. It all comes back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Dude, where can our audience find you, discover you, keep up with you?
Yeah. So at Matt Gottesman is a great start on Instagram. Gottesman, but also mattgottesman.substack.com. That's where I do a lot of my writing, a lot more writing, a lot of growing is happening over there. And then the podcast is The Niche Is You. It's on all platforms, niche, Niche, and mattgottesman.com. And but yeah, those are the main places. I mean, it's easy. They can even DM me on Instagram. I answer, as you know, I answer everybody's DMs over there. So yeah, man, that's a start. That's the start.
Oh yeah, man. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, your light, and your energy, brother. I really do.
Thanks
for
you.
the
Likewise,
value that you bring. Yeah. Yeah. Keep doing it, man. Keep doing it.
Thank you for having me on too.
Dude, 100%. We're going to collaborate on something big down the road. No doubt.
We are.
Yeah, for sure.
Amen.
For everybody out there listening, when you're ready to become the fittest leader possible, reach out the next level. You know, you got everybody that we feature on Progress Always is now a resource for you and to you. You know, we don't have these conversations with people that don't practice abundance. So if not us, you got Matt and everybody else that we've interviewed thus far, and we will interview in the future. Until next time, Progress Always.